In today's episode, we're diving into 5 circus performers who were killed by animals, from a veteran animal trainer whose overconfidence led to his final performance, to a maintenance worker whose fatal shortcut put him face to face with a lioness. But first, we begin with the first story, where experience couldn't save a man from his own recklessness. It was August 12, 2015, and the Carson and Barnes Circus had set up camp in the dusty outskirts of Oklahoma City. The afternoon heat shimmered off the metal trailers and canvas tents, creating waves of distortion that made the whole scene feel dreamlike. Behind the main tent, away from the crowds and cotton candy vendors, sat the animal compound, a maze of reinforced cages and enclosures where the circus's most dangerous performers waited for their cues. Marcus Rodriguez had grown up in this world. At 38, he was third-generation circus, with calloused hands and scars that told stories of 15 years working with big cats. His grandfather had been a lion tamer in Mexico. His father a respected trainer who'd taught Marcus everything about reading animal behavior and respecting the invisible line between control and chaos. But lately, that line had been blurring. The divorce had hit Marcus hard. 3 months earlier, his wife had taken their 2 kids and moved back to her mother's house in Texas, citing his drinking and increasingly erratic behavior. The circus had always been his escape, but now it felt more like a prison. He'd started showing up to training sessions with alcohol on his breath, ignoring safety protocols his father had drilled into him since childhood. Other trainers had noticed, but Marcus was a Rodriguez, circus royalty, and nobody wanted to be the one to confront him. That afternoon, Marcus had been drinking since lunch. The other handlers had gone to prepare for the evening show, leaving him alone with the animals. He stood outside Sasha's enclosure, swaying slightly, studying the massive Siberian tiger that had been giving everyone trouble for weeks. Sasha was 400 pounds of pure muscle and predatory instinct, with a coat like burnished gold and eyes that seemed to calculate every movement around his cage. Siberian tigers are the largest cats in the world, capable of taking down prey twice their size with a single bite. In the wild, they're solitary hunters who patrol territories spanning hundreds of square miles. Even in captivity, they retain every instinct that made them apex predators. Their jaws can exert over 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bone like kindling. When stressed or confined, they become increasingly unpredictable, and Sasha had been showing all the warning signs: pacing, refusing food, and displaying aggressive posturing toward anyone who approached his enclosure. Marcus fumbled with the lock on Sasha's cage, his movements clumsy from the alcohol. The tiger watched him with predatory focus, tail twitching with barely contained energy. Any sober trainer would have recognized the danger signals: the flattened ears, the low crouch, the way Sasha's muscles coiled beneath his striped coat. But Marcus was operating on 15 years of muscle memory and liquid courage, convinced that his special connection with the animals would protect him. The cage door swung open with a metallic clang. Marcus stepped inside, closing it behind him with the casual confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. Sasha remained motionless for a moment, yellow eyes locked on the intruder in his territory. Then, without warning, the tiger exploded into motion. Sasha covered the distance between them in 2 powerful bounds, his massive frame slamming into Marcus with the force of a freight train. The impact drove Marcus backward against the cage wall, his head striking the metal bars with a sickening crack. Before he could recover, Sasha's jaws clamped down on his skull, the tiger's canine teeth punching through bone like it was paper. Marcus's body went limp instantly as Sasha's bite crushed his skull and severed his spinal cord. The tiger shook his head violently, the way a house cat might shake a mouse, before releasing his grip and stepping back. Blood pooled rapidly beneath Marcus's motionless form as Sasha began pacing around the body, his territorial instincts fully engaged. The screams from other circus workers brought the emergency response team running. They found Sasha standing over Marcus's body, the tiger's muzzle stained red, his eyes wild with adrenaline. It took 3 tranquilizer darts to bring the massive cat down, and even then, the handlers waited a full 10 minutes before entering the enclosure. Marcus was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's report listed massive cranial trauma and cervical spine fracture as the cause of death. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been intoxicated at the time of the attack, with a blood alcohol level nearly twice the legal limit. Carson and Barnes Circus faced no criminal charges, but they quietly implemented new safety protocols requiring 2 handlers present during any big cat interactions. Sasha was euthanized 3 days later, despite protests from animal rights groups who argued the tiger was simply acting on instinct. The circus released a brief statement calling it a tragic accident and expressing condolences to the Rodriguez family. Marcus's funeral drew hundreds of circus performers from across the country. His father, now in his 70s, gave a brief eulogy about respecting the animals and never forgetting that they were wild creatures, not pets. The family requested donations to a fund for circus safety training instead of flowers. While Marcus's overconfidence proved fatal in the ring, Danny Kowalski's shortcuts led him straight into the path of a hungry lioness. It was June 3, 2016, and the Ringling Brothers Circus had just finished their evening performance in Tampa, Florida. The arena was empty now, save for the scattered popcorn and the lingering smell of sawdust and animal musk. Outside, the Florida humidity hung thick in the air, making everything feel sticky and oppressive even after sunset. In the animal compound behind the main tent, the big cats paced restlessly in their enclosures, still wound up from the noise and lights of the show. Danny Kowalski was 29 and perpetually broke. He'd dropped out of community college 3 years earlier when his student loans ran out, and since then he'd been bouncing between part-time jobs, never quite able to get ahead. The circus gig was supposed to be temporary, just set up and tear down work to help pay rent on his studio apartment, but temporary had stretched into 8 months. He wasn't complaining, though. The work was physical but straightforward, and it beat flipping burgers or stocking shelves. Danny had grown comfortable around the circus animals over the months. He'd seen the lions and tigers up close dozens of times, watched the trainers work with them, even helped clean their enclosures during the day when the cats were secured in their transport cages. They seemed almost domesticated to him now, big, lazy house cats that happened to weigh 300 pounds. It was easy to forget what they really were when you saw them lounging in the sun or being fed chunks of meat by their handlers. That night, Danny was working alone, cleaning up the debris from the evening show. His supervisor had already gone home, leaving him with a list of tasks and instructions to lock up when he finished. The work was routine: sweep the performance area, secure the equipment, check that all the animal enclosures were properly locked. It should have taken 2 hours, but Danny was tired and wanted to get home to catch the late game on TV. African lions are social predators that hunt in coordinated groups in the wild. Females do most of the hunting, using stealth and teamwork to bring down prey much larger than themselves, even in captivity. They retain their predatory instincts and territorial behavior. A female lion can weigh up to 400 pounds and reach speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. Their night vision is 6 times better than a human's, making them perfectly adapted for hunting in darkness. Instead of walking the long way around the animal compound to reach the equipment storage area, Danny decided to cut through the restricted zone where the big cats were housed. He'd done it before during the day when handlers were around, and nothing had ever happened. The enclosures looked secure, and he could hear the animals moving around inside. Normal sounds that didn't alarm him. What Danny didn't notice was that one of the lioness enclosures had a faulty latch. The mechanism had been sticking for days, requiring extra pressure to fully engage, but the maintenance request had gotten lost in paperwork. During the evening show, the vibrations from the crowd and music had caused the partially engaged latch to work loose. Danny was halfway through the compound when he heard a metallic scraping sound behind him. He turned to see a cage door swinging open and a massive lioness emerging into the walkway. For a moment, both human and predator froze, staring at each other in the dim light from the security lamps. The lioness was a 300-pound female named Nala, one of the circus's veteran performers, but away from the bright lights and cracking whips of the performance ring, she was pure predator. Her golden eyes locked onto Danny's movement as he slowly backed away, every instinct telling her that this was prey behavior. Danny managed 3 steps backward before Nala launched herself at him. She covered the 20-foot distance in 2 powerful bounds, her claws extended and jaws open. The impact knocked Danny face first onto the concrete walkway, his flashlight spinning away into the darkness. Nala's jaws clamped down on the back of Danny's neck. her canine teeth punching through muscle and vertebrae with crushing force. Danny's scream cut off abruptly as his spinal cord severed. The lioness maintained her grip, shaking her head to ensure the kill, before releasing him and stepping back to assess her prize. The security guard on duty heard the brief scream and came running with his radio and flashlight. He found Danny's body lying motionless in a spreading pool of blood, with Nala standing nearby, her muzzle stained red. The lioness showed no aggression toward the guard. She'd made her kill and was now simply guarding it. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do for Danny. The lioness was tranquilized and secured back in her enclosure, while paramedics confirmed what everyone already knew. Danny had died instantly from massive trauma to his cervical spine and carotid artery. The investigation revealed the faulty latch and Danny's unauthorized route through the animal compound. Ringling Brothers faced no criminal liability, but they implemented new security measures including motion sensors in restricted areas and mandatory buddy system protocols for after-hours work. Danny's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit that was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. His mother used part of the settlement to establish a scholarship fund for students pursuing animal care careers, hoping that better training might prevent similar tragedies. Danny's shortcut cost him his life in seconds. But for Amanda Walsh, it was curiosity about a brown bear that led to a fatal encounter. It was September 18, 2014, and the Kelly Miller Circus had rolled into a dusty fairground outside Austin, Texas. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the collection of trailers, tents, and animal enclosures that made up the traveling show. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the asphalt, and the smell of hay, sawdust, and animal musk hung heavy in the still air. Amanda Walsh was 24 and in her second year of veterinary school at Texas A&M. She'd grown up on a ranch outside Houston, surrounded by horses and cattle, but exotic animals fascinated her in a way that domestic livestock never could. When the local radio station announced a contest for backstage passes to the circus, she'd called in every hour until she won. Her boyfriend Jake had been dating Amanda for 6 months and was still trying to impress her. At 25, he worked construction and had never been particularly interested in animals, but Amanda's enthusiasm was infectious. When she'd won the backstage passes, he'd suggested they make a whole day of it. Lunch in Austin, the circus, maybe dinner afterward. He wanted to show her he could be spontaneous and adventurous. The backstage tour was supposed to be supervised, but their guide had been called away to handle some crisis with the sound system. He'd left them with instructions to stay in the designated areas and promised to return in 15 minutes. Amanda and Jake found themselves alone in a maze of trailers and equipment, with signs pointing toward the animal holding area. Amanda had been studying large mammal anatomy all semester, and the chance to see exotic animals up close was too tempting to resist. Jake, eager to seem supportive of her studies, suggested they take a quick look around while their guide was busy. The authorized personnel-only signs seemed more like suggestions than serious warnings. Brown bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing strength that can crush a bowling ball. Despite their bulky appearance, they can run 35 miles per hour and climb trees with surprising agility. In captivity, they often develop stereotypical behaviors like pacing and swaying due to stress and confinement. Their seemingly docile demeanor can change to explosive aggression in seconds, especially when they feel threatened or cornered. The animal holding area was a series of reinforced enclosures arranged in a rough circle, with narrow walkways between them. Most of the animals were resting in the afternoon heat, a few lions sprawled in whatever shade they could find, an elephant swaying rhythmically beside a water trough. At the far end of the compound sat a massive brown bear in a cage barely large enough for him to stand and turn around. Amanda approached the bear's enclosure with the clinical interest of a veterinary student. The animal was enormous, easily 600 pounds, with dark brown fur and small, intelligent eyes that tracked her movement. She pulled out her phone to take pictures, fascinated by the bear's massive paws and the way his claws curved like black daggers. Jake hung back, suddenly uncomfortable with how close Amanda was getting to the cage. The bear had been pacing when they arrived, but now he sat motionless, watching Amanda with an intensity that made Jake's skin crawl. He called out for her to be careful, but Amanda was absorbed in her observations, noting the bear's muscle structure and the way his ears swiveled to track sounds. The bear's name was Bruno, and he'd been with the circus for 8 years. The constant travel, noise, and confinement had taken their toll on his mental state. He'd developed obsessive behaviors and had become increasingly aggressive toward his handlers. The stress of the circus environment had pushed him to the edge of his tolerance, and Amanda's presence so close to his cage triggered every territorial instinct he possessed. Amanda leaned closer to get a better look at Bruno's paws, fascinated by their size and structure. She was less than 2 feet from the bars when Bruno moved with shocking speed for such a massive animal. His right paw shot through the bars, claws extended, and hooked into Amanda's shirt, dragging her against the cage. Amanda screamed as Bruno's claws raked across her chest, tearing through fabric and flesh with equal ease. His left paw followed, catching her throat and shoulder, the razor-sharp claws opening deep gashes that immediately began spurting blood. Jake lunged forward, grabbing Amanda's legs and trying to pull her away, but Bruno's grip was too strong. The bear's claws had punctured Amanda's carotid artery and torn through the muscles of her chest and shoulder. Blood poured from the wounds as Bruno continued to rake his claws across her upper body, his massive strength easily overpowering her attempts to break free. Jake's screams for help echoed across the compound as Amanda's struggles grew weaker. Circus staff came running with tranquilizer guns and metal poles, but it took precious minutes to force Bruno to release his grip. By the time they pulled Amanda away from the cage, she had lost massive amounts of blood. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her, but the damage was too severe. She died in the ambulance en route to the hospital. The investigation found that Amanda and Jake had violated clearly posted safety regulations by entering the restricted area unsupervised. Kelly Miller Circus faced no criminal charges, but they implemented new security measures, including locked gates and increased supervision of backstage tours. Bruno was relocated to a wildlife sanctuary in Colorado, where he lived in a larger, more natural enclosure until his death from old age 5 years later. Amanda's family established a scholarship fund for veterinary students studying wildlife medicine, hoping her passion for animals might inspire others to pursue careers in conservation. Amanda's curiosity about exotic animals proved fatal, but Elena Petrov's emotional attachment to her performing chimps led to an even more tragic end. It was April 7, 2017, and the Big Apple Circus had set up their distinctive red and yellow tent in Lincoln Center, New York. The spring evening was crisp and clear, with the lights of Manhattan creating a glittering backdrop for the circus's final performance of the season. Inside the animal quarters behind the main tent, the atmosphere was quieter, almost melancholy, as performers prepared to say goodbye to another successful run. Elena Petro had been part of the circus world for 30 years, ever since she'd defected from the Soviet Union in 1987. At 52, she was one of the most respected primate trainers in the business, known for her gentle approach and deep understanding of chimpanzee behavior. She'd raised several chimps from infancy, bottle feeding them and teaching them the complex routines that made audiences gasp with delight. To Elena, they weren't just performing animals, they were her children. This was supposed to be Elena's final season. She'd been planning her retirement for months, looking forward to a quiet life in upstate New York where she could write her memoirs and maybe consult for wildlife sanctuaries. But leaving the chimps behind was breaking her heart, especially Boris, the 150-pound male she'd worked with for 12 years. Elena had raised Boris from a baby, teaching him everything from simple tricks to complex acrobatic routines. She'd been there for his first steps, his first successful performance, every milestone of his life in captivity. But Boris was no longer the playful infant she remembered. At 15, he was fully mature, with the strength of 5 grown men and increasingly territorial instincts that modern animal welfare protocols took seriously. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest relatives, sharing 98% of our DNA, but that similarity makes them more dangerous, not less. Adult males can weigh up to 200 pounds and possess strength that far exceeds human capability. They have long, powerful arms, opposable thumbs, and canine teeth designed for tearing flesh. In the wild, they live in complex social hierarchies, maintained through displays of dominance and occasional violence. Captive chimps often develop behavioral problems as they mature, becoming unpredictable and potentially lethal to their handlers. The other trainers had noticed changes in Boris over the past year. He'd become more aggressive during training sessions, challenging Elena's authority in ways he never had before. The circus veterinarian had recommended additional safety protocols, including never entering Boris's enclosure alone, but Elena dismissed these concerns as overprotective bureaucracy. That evening, after the final performance, Elena made her way to the animal quarters for what she planned as a private goodbye with Boris. The other handlers had already secured the animals for the night and gone home, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and her memories. She stood outside Boris's enclosure, watching him through the reinforced glass as he sat grooming himself in the corner. Elena unlocked the enclosure door and stepped inside, speaking softly to Boris in the mixture of Russian and English she'd always used with him. The chimp looked up at her approach, his dark eyes unreadable. For a moment, the scene looked peaceful, a woman saying goodbye to an old friend. But Boris was no longer the infant Elena remembered. 15 years of captivity had taken their toll on his psyche, and his mature male instincts saw Elena's presence in his territory as a challenge to his dominance. Without warning, he launched himself at her with explosive violence. Boris's first blow caught Elena in the chest, his knuckles striking with enough force to crack ribs. She stumbled backward, gasping, as the chimp followed up with a vicious bite to her left hand, his canine teeth shearing through bone and tendon. Elena screamed as Boris grabbed her hair and slammed her head against the concrete wall of the enclosure. The chimp's attack was methodical and brutal. He bit her face repeatedly, tearing away chunks of flesh and muscle, while his powerful hands beat her about the head and shoulders. Elena's screams echoed through the empty animal quarters, but there was no one close enough to hear them over the distant sounds of the city. Boris dragged Elena across the floor of the enclosure, his teeth locked on her throat, shaking his head like a dog with a toy. Blood sprayed across the walls as major arteries opened under his assault. Elena's struggles grew weaker as shock and blood loss took their toll, but Boris continued his attack with relentless fury. A security guard making his rounds heard the commotion and rushed to investigate. He found Elena's body lying motionless in a pool of blood, with Boris sitting nearby, his hands and face stained red. The chimp showed no aggression towards the guard. His territorial display was complete. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Elena had already died from massive blood loss and trauma to her head and neck. The coroner's report listed over 40 separate bite wounds and blunt force injuries. Boris was tranquilized and secured while investigators documented the scene. The Big Apple Circus faced intense scrutiny from animal welfare groups and city officials. Elena's death highlighted the growing controversy over the use of great apes in entertainment, and several cities began considering bans on primate performances. The circus quietly retired their remaining chimps to sanctuaries and eliminated primate acts from future shows. Boris was relocated to a specialized facility for former entertainment chimps, where he lived in isolation for the remainder of his life. Animal behaviorists who evaluated him found no signs of mental illness. He had simply acted on natural instincts that captivity had never been able to suppress. Elena's memorial service drew hundreds of circus performers and animal trainers from around the world. Her colleagues remembered her as a pioneer who had genuinely loved the animals she worked with, even as they acknowledged that love hadn't been enough to protect her from the wild nature that no amount of training could eliminate. Elena's bond with Boris couldn't save her from his primal instincts, but Bobby Chen's military training proved useless against a startled grizzly bear. It was November 22, 2013, and the Shrine Circus had set up in a converted warehouse in Detroit, Michigan. The late autumn night was bitter cold, with wind howling through gaps in the old building's walls and rattling temporary structures housing the traveling show. Bobby Chen was 31 and struggling with demons that followed him home from Afghanistan. He'd served 2 tours as military police, and the transition to civilian life had been harder than expected. The quiet security job at the circus seemed perfect for someone who needed solitude and routine. The night shift suited Bobby's insomnia perfectly. While most people slept, He walked the circus perimeter, checking locks and watching for anything out of place. The work was peaceful, almost meditative, and the presence of animals was oddly comforting after growing up around his grandfather's farm animals in California. Bobby had been working circus security for 3 months, developing his own routine for overnight rounds. He knew which animals were restless sleepers, which enclosures had temperamental latches, and where the building's heating system created noise. It was predictable work, and predictability was something Bobby craved. During his 2 a.m. rounds, Bobby noticed one of the bear enclosures had a loose panel. The metal sheeting forming part of the enclosure wall was bowed outward, creating a gap that looked potentially dangerous. His military training had taught him to identify and address security vulnerabilities immediately. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with females weighing up to 800 pounds and males reaching over 1,000 pounds. Despite their bulk, they can run 35 miles per hour and possess strength capable of decapitating a moose with a single swipe. Their hearing and sense of smell are exceptionally acute, making them nearly impossible to approach undetected. When startled or threatened, they react with explosive violence. Bobby decided to investigate the loose panel himself rather than wake animal handlers. He grabbed his flashlight and toolkit from the security office and made his way to the enclosure housing Greta, a 500-pound female grizzly who'd been with the circus for 6 years. Bobby approached quietly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping bear. His flashlight revealed several bolts had worked free from their moorings. It looked like simple repair work. Tighten bolts, maybe add washers to prevent future loosening. What Bobby didn't realize was that the loose panel had been gradually weakening for weeks. His presence and flashlight beam had awakened Greta, who was now watching through the darkness with growing agitation. Bobby was focused on repair work when Greta suddenly charged the weakened panel. Her 500-pound bulk struck the loose metal sheeting with tremendous force, tearing it completely away and creating a bear-sized opening. Bobby spun around at the sound of rending metal, his flashlight catching Greta's massive form as she squeezed through the gap. The bear's first swipe caught Bobby across the chest, her claws raking through his security uniform and flesh beneath. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into equipment crates. Greta was already on top of him before he could roll away. Greta's jaws clamped down on Bobby's shoulder, her canine teeth punching through muscle and grinding against bone. She shook her massive head before releasing him and striking again with her claws. Bobby's ribs cracked audibly under the force as she continued her assault. The bear's claws opened deep gashes across his torso and skull, while her teeth crushed his ribcage and punctured vital organs. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes before Greta, satisfied the threat was eliminated, returned to her damaged enclosure. Bobby's body was discovered the next morning by circus staff. Investigation revealed he had violated protocol by attempting repairs without notifying animal handlers. The circus implemented new policies requiring immediate notification of structural issues and prohibiting security personnel from approaching enclosures during overnight shifts. Greta was retired to a wildlife sanctuary in Montana, where she lived until her death 8 years later. Bobby's funeral was attended by fellow veterans and circus workers who remembered him as a quiet, dedicated man. His family established a fund to help other veterans transition to civilian careers, hoping better support might prevent similar tragedies. Thanks for watching. Just when you think you understand the relationship between humans and captive wild animals, we're just getting started. Click the next video for the next stories that will show you the most dangerous places on Earth.